In the glittering halls of Rosewood Palace, where centuries of tradition meet modern-day pressures, one afternoon would change everything. When Queen Consort Isabella's carefully controlled world begins to crack under mounting stress, and a routine security inspection spirals into chaos, it falls to 12-year-old Princess Charlotte, wise beyond her years, to navigate a crisis that threatens to expose the royal family's most guarded secrets. What happens when the weight of a crown becomes too much to bear, and a child must become the adult in the room? The marble floors of Rosewood Palace gleamed under the afternoon sunlight streaming through towering windows, but Queen Consort Isabella felt none of its warmth. She paced the length of her private study, her silk gown rustling with each agitated step. The morning's newspapers lay scattered across her mahogany desk, their headlines screaming accusations about royal spending, charity fund mismanagement, and her allegedly extravagant lifestyle. Each word felt like a dagger to her carefully constructed public image. Isabella had never asked for this life. Born Isabella Montgomery, daughter of a textile merchant, she had married into the royal family 20 years ago out of love, not ambition. But love, she had learned, was a luxury few queens could afford. Every smile was scrutinized, every decision dissected by the press and parliament alike. The weight of expectation had grown heavier with each passing year, and lately it felt suffocating. "Your Majesty," came a soft knock at the door. Margaret, her lady-in-waiting for 15 years, entered with a tea service. The elderly woman had witnessed Isabella's transformation from a nervous bride to a poised queen. But today she noticed something different. A dangerous glint in Isabella's eyes. A tension in her shoulders that spoke of barely contained pressure. "The morning briefing papers, ma'am," Margaret said, setting down the tray with practiced precision. "The Prime Minister's office has requested a response to the charity allegations by tomorrow." Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the documents. The accusations were particularly cruel this time, suggesting she had diverted funds from children's charities to pay for personal luxuries. It was completely false, but Isabella knew that truth mattered little in the court of public opinion. She had seen other royals destroyed by similar campaigns, their lives dismantled piece by piece, until nothing remained but hollow shells wearing crowns. "Ma'am, perhaps we should call Dr. Whitmore," Margaret suggested gently, recognizing the signs of one of Isabella's increasingly frequent episodes. The Queen had been struggling with anxiety and depression for months, though it was kept strictly confidential. The royal family's mental health struggles were never to be acknowledged publicly. "No doctors," Isabella snapped, her voice sharper than intended. "I don't need anyone else telling me I'm not fit for this role." Margaret retreated quietly, leaving Isabella alone with her spiraling thoughts. The Queen stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror across the room. The woman looking back seemed like a stranger, hollow-eyed, pale, wearing a mask of composure that was becoming harder to maintain each day. She thought of her daughter Charlotte, only 12 years old but already showing signs of the same pressure that was crushing Isabella. The girl attended royal functions with perfect poise, spoke 3 languages fluently, and carried herself with dignity that belied her age. But Isabella often caught Charlotte staring out windows with a wistful expression, as if dreaming of a life beyond palace walls. The afternoon brought a scheduled security inspection, a routine quarterly review that Isabella usually barely noticed. But today, every uniformed figure felt like a threat, every clipboard and checklist another form of scrutiny. Head of Security James Morrison, a stern man in his 50s who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, was conducting his rounds with his usual military precision. Morrison had always made Isabella uncomfortable. His cold efficiency reminded her too much of her critics, people who saw her as a problem to be managed, rather than a person struggling with impossible expectations. When he appeared in her study doorway with 2 junior guards, clipboards in hand, Isabella felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to fracture. "Your Majesty, routine security sweep," Morrison announced in his clipped, military tone. "We'll need to inspect all rooms and review your daily schedule for potential vulnerabilities." Isabella watched as the guards moved through her private space, opening drawers, checking behind furniture, treating her sanctuary like a crime scene. Morrison himself approached her desk, where the morning's brutal headlines still lay scattered like evidence of her failures. "Ma'am, I'll need you to step aside while we check this area," Morrison said, his tone brooking no argument. Something inside Isabella snapped. Perhaps it was the lack of sleep, the relentless pressure, or simply the final indignity of being ordered around in her own private space. The careful control she had maintained for 20 years shattered in an instant. "How dare you!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the study's high ceilings. "This is my private room. My sanctuary." Morrison, startled by the outburst but trained to handle difficult situations, maintained his professional demeanor. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns, but security protocols— I don't care about your protocols." Isabella's voice rose higher, years of suppressed frustration pouring out. "I'm sick of everyone telling me what to do, where to go, how to think. I'm not your prisoner." The other guards had stopped their inspection, uncertain how to proceed. They had never witnessed such a breakdown from a member of the royal family. Morrison stepped forward, perhaps intending to calm the situation, but his movement only escalated Isabella's panic. In her distressed state, Isabella interpreted Morrison's approach as aggressive. 20 years of feeling trapped, controlled, and constantly watched converged into a moment of pure desperation. She lunged forward, not with any real intent to harm, but in a wild attempt to push past what felt like another barrier to her freedom. "Leave me alone!" she cried, her hands striking out frantically. "Just leave me alone!" Morrison, caught off guard by the physical outburst, stumbled backward. His training kicked in, and he moved to restrain what he perceived as an attack, his hands reaching for Isabella's wrists. The situation was spiraling completely out of control, with the Queen Consort of Rosewood in a physical altercation with the head of palace security. It was at this moment that 12-year-old Princess Charlotte appeared in the doorway. Charlotte had been returning from her French lesson when she heard the shouting. Unlike most children who might have run away or called for help, Charlotte possessed an unusual maturity, born from years of observing adult behavior at state functions and family gatherings. She had seen her mother's increasing distress over recent weeks and had been worried, though no one had thought to explain to her what was happening. The scene before her was shocking. Her mother, usually the picture of royal composure, locked in what appeared to be a struggle with Morrison, while other guards stood frozen with uncertainty. But Charlotte's response was not panic or tears. Instead, she drew upon the diplomatic training that had been instilled in her since she could speak. "Mr. Morrison," Charlotte said in a clear, calm voice that cut through the chaos, "please step back immediately." Her tone carried an authority that seemed impossible from someone so young. But it was the voice of someone born to command. Morrison, recognizing the princess and responding to the unexpected composure in her voice, immediately released Isabella and stepped away. "Your Royal Highness," he said somewhat breathlessly, "your mother became agitated during routine security." "I can see what happened," Charlotte interrupted, moving to her mother's side. Isabella was now trembling violently, tears streaming down her face, the fight completely gone out of her. Charlotte gently took her mother's hand, her small fingers warm and steady. "Mama," she said softly, using the private term she hadn't used in public for years. "It's all right. They're going to leave now so you can rest." Charlotte turned to Morrison and the other guards with a gaze that seemed far older than her 12 years. "Gentlemen, I believe this security inspection can be completed at another time. My mother is clearly unwell and needs medical attention and privacy." Morrison found himself in an unprecedented situation. He had protocols to follow, but he was now dealing with a minor royal who was displaying more composure and authority than many adults he had encountered. The princess was technically not in his chain of command, but her presence had completely changed the dynamics of the situation. "Princess Charlotte," Morrison said carefully, "we have protocols regarding security incidents." "Mr. Morrison," Charlotte replied with quiet steel in her voice, "what you have witnessed is a medical episode, not a security incident. My mother has been under tremendous stress, as I'm sure you're aware from the recent press coverage. She needs care, not an investigation." Charlotte's words were carefully chosen. She was reframing the entire incident, using language that protected her mother while appealing to Morrison's sense of duty and discretion. It was a masterful piece of diplomacy from someone who should have been in school learning basic mathematics. "I will take full responsibility for my mother's care and ensure that this situation is handled appropriately," Charlotte continued. I assume we can count on your discretion regarding what is clearly a private family medical matter." Morrison looked at the young princess, poised, articulate, and somehow managing to de-escalate a situation that could have had serious consequences for everyone involved.
Isabella had collapsed into a chair, no longer a threat to anyone, clearly in need of medical attention rather than disciplinary action. "Of course, Your Royal Highness," Morrison said finally.
"We'll postpone the security inspection and ensure privacy for Her Majesty's recovery." As the guards filed out, Charlotte remained with her mother, gently stroking Isabella's hair as the older woman continued to shake with the aftershocks of her breakdown. The 12-year-old princess had just prevented a scandal that could have destroyed her family's reputation and possibly her mother's position within the royal family. But Charlotte knew this was only the beginning. She had seen something in her mother's eyes that terrified her, a desperation that suggested this breakdown was not an isolated incident, but part of something much larger and more dangerous. As she held her mother's trembling hand, Charlotte realized that the adult world she had been trained to navigate was about to test her in ways no protocol manual could have prepared her for. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the study windows, but the palace felt different now, less secure, more fragile. Charlotte had just learned that sometimes the people meant to protect you need protection themselves, and sometimes a child must become the adult in the room long before they're ready. The days following the incident in Queen Isabella's study passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of damage control and medical intervention. Charlotte had insisted that Dr. Sarah Whitmore, the royal family's most trusted physician and psychiatrist, be called immediately. Dr. Whitmore was one of the few people outside the immediate family who knew about Isabella's ongoing mental health struggles, and her discretion was absolute. Charlotte found herself in an unusual position for a 12-year-old. She was now the primary coordinator of her mother's care, while maintaining the facade that everything was normal. She attended her regular lessons, appeared at scheduled public events, and smiled for photographers, all while carrying the weight of her mother's secret crisis. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Whitmore said during one of their private conversations in the palace's medical wing, "your mother's condition is more serious than we initially realized. The stress of royal life combined with the recent media attacks has triggered a severe anxiety disorder with episodes of panic and dissociation." Charlotte sat in the leather chair across from Dr. Whitmore's desk, her legs barely reaching the floor, but her attention was entirely focused and adult-like. "What does that mean for her ability to perform her duties?" she asked. Dr. Whitmore was struck by the maturity of the question. Most children Charlotte's age would have asked if their mother was going to be okay, not about duty and royal obligations. "She needs rest, Charlotte. Complete rest from public appearances and royal functions for at least several weeks, possibly months." "That's impossible," Charlotte replied immediately. "The Harvest Festival Charity Gala is in 5 days. Mother is the patron of 3 of the benefiting charities. The Prime Minister's wife is expecting her at the literacy campaign launch next Tuesday. And the Swedish royal family is arriving next month for the state dinner that Mother has been planning for 6 months. Whitmore leaned forward, concerned by the weight of responsibility this child was carrying. "Charlotte, you're 12 years old. These are not your concerns to manage." "But they are," Charlotte said simply, "because if Mother can't fulfill her obligations, and no one else steps in appropriately, the press will notice. They'll start asking questions. And if they discover what really happened in the study with Mr. Morrison..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Charlotte was right, and Dr. Whitmore knew it. The royal family's reputation was built on an image of stability and duty. Any sign of weakness, especially mental health struggles, would be seized upon by critics and potentially used to question the monarchy's fitness to govern. "What do you propose?" Dr. Whitmore asked, curious about what solution this remarkable young mind might devise. "Mother needs to make brief, carefully controlled appearances to maintain the illusion that everything is normal," Charlotte said, her words measured and thoughtful. "But I need to be present at each event to manage any potential difficulties. We create a narrative that I'm taking a more active role in royal duties as part of my education and preparation for future responsibilities." It was a sophisticated plan that would allow Isabella to fulfill her most crucial obligations while having Charlotte nearby to intervene if another episode occurred. Dr. Whitmore realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. A child not just coping with family crisis, but strategically managing it with wisdom beyond her years. The Harvest Festival Charity Gala became the first test of Charlotte's plan. Isabella, medicated and carefully prepared, appeared radiant in an emerald gown that complemented Charlotte's smaller version in the same color. To the outside world, it looked like a charming mother-daughter appearance, with the young princess being gradually introduced to more formal royal duties. But Charlotte watched her mother with the intensity of a bodyguard, noting every sign of stress or anxiety. When Isabella's hands began to tremble during the receiving line, Charlotte smoothly stepped forward to help guide guests along. When a particularly aggressive journalist asked pointed questions about the charity fund allegations, Charlotte deflected with a well-rehearsed answer about the importance of supporting rural communities. "Your Royal Highness," the journalist pressed, turning to Charlotte, "do you think the royal family should be more transparent about how charity funds are managed?" It was a loaded question designed to trap either Isabella or Charlotte into making a statement that could be twisted into a headline. Isabella froze, her practiced smile faltering as panic began to set in. But Charlotte had anticipated this moment. "Transparency is certainly important," Charlotte replied with a composure that surprised even seasoned royal reporters. "That's why all royal charitable activities undergo regular independent auditing, and the results are publicly available through the Royal Trust Office. I think what's most important is that these funds continue to reach the people who need them most, like the farming families we're supporting tonight." She had not only answered the question, but redirected attention back to the actual beneficiaries of the charity, making it difficult for the journalist to continue pursuing the scandal angle without appearing callous toward struggling families. Lord Hamilton, the king's private secretary, who had been watching the exchange with growing amazement, later approached Charlotte privately. "Your Royal Highness, that was remarkably well handled." "Thank you, Lord Hamilton," Charlotte replied. But her attention was on her mother, who was now safely engaged in conversation with the Swedish ambassador about less controversial topics. "Princess, I hope you don't mind me asking, but you seem to have developed quite sophisticated media management skills. Are you receiving additional training?" "I've always paid attention during public events. I suppose I'm naturally observant." It was both true and evasive, a perfect diplomatic response. Charlotte had indeed always been observant, but her recent crash course in crisis management had accelerated her learning dramatically. She was becoming an expert in reading not just her mother's emotional state, but the moods and intentions of everyone around them. The evening progressed smoothly until the speeches began. Isabella was scheduled to give the closing address, thanking the donors and highlighting the impact of their contributions. Charlotte had helped her practice the speech dozens of times, but as Isabella approached the podium, Charlotte could see the telltale signs of an impending anxiety attack, the slight tremor in her mother's hands, the way she was breathing too quickly, the glazed look in her eyes. Charlotte made a split-second decision. She rose from her seat at the head table and walked gracefully to the podium, where her mother stood frozen with the microphone in her hand. "Mama?" Charlotte whispered, standing beside Isabella so they both faced the audience of over 300 distinguished guests. "Remember what we practiced. Just the first line, and then I'll help." Isabella looked down at her daughter and found strength in those steady young eyes. "Good evening," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "And thank you all for supporting tonight's important cause." Charlotte stepped slightly forward, and without appearing to take over, began speaking in harmony with her mother. "The princess and I wanted to personally thank each of you," Charlotte said, including Isabella in every statement while subtly guiding the speech forward. To the audience, it appeared to be a charming mother-daughter presentation, with the young princess learning to speak publicly alongside her mother. But Charlotte was actually conducting a masterful rescue operation, keeping Isabella grounded and functional while maintaining the appearance of a planned joint appearance. They concluded the speech to enthusiastic applause, and Charlotte guided her mother gracefully away from the podium. Lord Hamilton, watching from the audience, made a mental note to discuss this remarkable young princess with the king. Charlotte was displaying leadership qualities that some adult royals never developed. Later that evening, after Isabella had been settled safely in her private quarters with Dr. Whitmore's supervision, Charlotte sat in her own room reviewing the evening's events. She kept a private journal, not the official diary that would someday be preserved in royal archives, but a personal record of her thoughts and observations. Tonight I learned that sometimes helping someone means standing beside them rather than taking over, she wrote. Mother needed to give that speech herself to maintain her dignity and confidence. My job was to make sure she could do it safely, not to do it for her. A soft knock interrupted her writing. Margaret, her mother's lady-in-waiting, peeked into the room. Your Royal Highness, I wanted to thank you for tonight. Your mother, she's been struggling more than most people realize. I know, Margaret, Charlotte said, setting down her pen. How long have you been covering for her? Margaret's eyes widened at the directness of the question. Your Royal Highness, I would never presume to... Margaret, you've been adjusting her schedule, screening her calls, and making excuses for weeks. I'm not criticizing you. I'm grateful, but I need to know how bad things have been so I can help properly. Margaret sat down in the chair across from Charlotte's desk, looking at this 12-year-old who spoke like someone 3 times her age. She hasn't been sleeping. She barely eats. Some mornings, she can't get out of bed until Dr. Whitmore adjusts her medication. The press coverage about the charity allegations has made everything worse. Has she talked about giving up her duties? Stepping down? Charlotte asked quietly. Margaret nodded reluctantly. She's mentioned it several times. She feels like she's failing everyone. The king, the country, the family. She thinks everyone would be better off without her. She had suspected her mother's depression was severe, but the thought of Isabella actually abdicating her role, or worse, was terrifying. The scandal would be enormous, and the personal cost to their family would be devastating. Margaret, I need you to promise me something, Charlotte said seriously. If Mother ever seems like she might harm herself, or if she makes any definitive statements about leaving her position, you call me immediately, day or night. Your Royal Highness, surely the King or Lord Hamilton would handle it through official channels, which would mean committees and protocols and eventually media leaks. Charlotte finished. I can handle Mother's crises quietly, without involving half the palace staff. The fewer people who knew about Isabella's struggles, the better chance they had of managing the situation without public exposure. There's something else, Margaret said hesitantly. Mr. Morrison has been asking questions about the security incident. He's been very discreet, but I think he's concerned about filing his quarterly report without addressing what happened. This was the complication Charlotte had been dreading. Morrison was a good man who took his job seriously, but his loyalty was to palace security protocols, not necessarily to protecting the royal family from embarrassing revelations. I'll handle Mr. Morrison, Charlotte said with more confidence than she felt. Thank you for telling me. After Margaret left, Charlotte returned to her journal, but found herself staring at the blank page. The weight of responsibility was becoming overwhelming, even for someone as mature as she was. She was managing her mother's mental health crisis, coordinating with medical staff, maintaining public appearances, and now facing potential complications from security protocols. For the first time since the incident in the study, Charlotte allowed herself to feel like the 12-year-old she actually was. She missed having adults handle the difficult problems. She missed being able to worry about homework and friends instead of media relations and medical episodes. But as she looked out her window at the palace gardens, where security lights illuminated the carefully manicured grounds, Charlotte reminded herself why she had taken on this burden. Her mother needed protection not just from external pressures, but from her own despair, and Charlotte was perhaps the only person positioned to provide that protection without triggering the very publicity that would destroy what remained of Isabella's emotional stability. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the literacy campaign event, another potential encounter with aggressive media, and somehow finding a way to address Morrison's concerns without compromising her mother's secret. Charlotte closed her journal and prepared for bed, knowing that her real education in royal duty was just beginning, and the next test would determine whether her careful plans could hold up under sustained pressure. The morning of the literacy campaign launch arrived with unexpected complications. Charlotte woke to find Margaret already in her room, her usual composed demeanor replaced by barely contained panic. "Your Royal Highness, your mother, she won't come out of her room," Margaret whispered urgently. "Dr. Whitmore is with her now, but she's saying she can't face another public event." She keeps repeating that everyone knows, that the whole country is watching her fail. Charlotte dressed quickly, her mind already shifting into crisis management mode. The literacy campaign was particularly important because it was being jointly hosted with the Prime Minister's wife, Eleanor Blackwood, a formidable woman known for her sharp intelligence and low tolerance for royal protocol violations. Canceling would raise immediate questions and potentially create a diplomatic incident. "Has anyone else been informed?" Charlotte asked as she made her way toward her mother's quarters. "Not yet, but Lord Hamilton will be expecting confirmation of departure times within the hour," Margaret replied. "And Mrs. Blackwood's office called twice last night to discuss logistics." Charlotte found Dr. Whitmore emerging from Isabella's bedroom, her expression grim. "Charlotte, your mother is experiencing a severe depressive episode. She's convinced that yesterday's charity gala was a disaster and that everyone could see her struggling. She's in no condition for public appearance today." Through the partially open door, Charlotte could hear her mother's muffled sobs. The sound cut through her like a knife, but she forced herself to think strategically rather than emotionally. "Whitmore, if Mother stays in bed today and misses the literacy campaign, what happens to her mental state?" Charlotte asked. "She'll likely feel even worse, more guilt, more sense of failure. But Charlotte, I can't recommend that she appear publicly in her current condition." Charlotte stood in the hallway, weighing impossible options. If Isabella didn't appear, the questions would be immediate and intense. The press was already suspicious after the recent charity fund allegations, and a missed commitment with the Prime Minister's wife would trigger speculation about everything from diplomatic tensions to health crises. But if Isabella did appear, and had another breakdown in front of Mrs. Blackwood and the assembled media, "I have an idea," Charlotte said finally. "But it's risky, and I'll need both of your help." 20 minutes later, Charlotte was sitting across from Lord Hamilton in his office, delivering what she hoped would be a convincing performance. "Lord Hamilton, I've been thinking about the literacy campaign event, and I'd like to propose a modification to today's program," she said with the confident tone she had perfected over recent weeks. "What sort of modification, Your Royal Highness?" Hamilton asked, curious but wary. Charlotte had been displaying unusual initiative lately, and while her interventions had been successful, they were also unprecedented for someone her age. "I'd like to present a joint speech with Mother about the importance of literacy education across different generations," Charlotte said. "The theme would be how reading connects us across age groups and social backgrounds. I've prepared some remarks about how young people experience literature differently than adults, and I think it would complement Mother's more traditional perspective." Hamilton considered this. It was actually a sophisticated concept that would generate positive media coverage and demonstrate the royal family's commitment to education. "That's quite thoughtful, Princess. Have you discussed this with your mother?" "She's very supportive," Charlotte lied smoothly. "She thinks it's an excellent way for me to take on more substantive royal duties while contributing meaningfully to causes we both care about." What Charlotte didn't mention was that this plan would allow Isabella to participate in the event with minimal speaking requirements and maximum support. Charlotte would handle the majority of the presentation, keeping Isabella engaged but not overwhelmed. Hamilton approved the modification, pleased with Charlotte's apparent initiative and educational focus. He immediately contacted Mrs. UIA, Blackwood's office, to brief them on the enhanced program, presenting it as an exciting development that would add depth to the event. The real challenge came when Charlotte returned to her mother's room. Isabella was still in bed, staring at the ceiling with vacant eyes, seemingly unaware of Charlotte's presence. "Mama," Charlotte said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." Isabella turned her head slightly, focusing on her daughter with difficulty. "Charlotte, I can't do it anymore. Everyone knows I'm a failure. The newspapers, the people at the gala last night, they all see right through me." Charlotte took her mother's hand, noting how cold and fragile it felt. "Mama, do you remember what you told me when I was 7 and I had to give my first public speech at the Children's Hospital opening?" Isabella's brow furrowed as she tried to recall the memory through her fog of depression.
"You told me that courage isn't about not being scared," Charlotte continued.
It's about doing what needs to be done, even when you're terrified. You said that sometimes we have to be brave not for ourselves, but for the people who need us to succeed. That's different, Charlotte. You were a child facing a simple speech. I'm supposed to be a leader, and I'm falling apart. No, Mama. You're a person dealing with an illness, just like someone with diabetes or heart problems. But today, there are children who need to see both of us supporting literacy programs. Blackwood is expecting us, and if we don't show up, all the questions and investigations that you're afraid of will actually start happening. Charlotte leaned closer, her voice becoming more urgent but still gentle. But I have a plan. You don't have to carry the whole event. I'll do most of the talking. You just need to be present and support what I'm saying. Dr. Whitmore will be there in the audience, and I'll be right beside you the entire time. Isabella searched her daughter's face, seeing a strength and determination that reminded her of her younger self, the woman who had married into the royal family full of hope and purpose. You're 12 years old, Charlotte. You shouldn't have to take care of me. Maybe not, Charlotte replied honestly. But right now, this is what our family needs. And sometimes we do things we're not ready for because the people we love need us to. It took another hour of gentle persuasion combined with Dr. Whitmore's careful adjustment of Isabella's medication, but eventually Isabella agreed to attempt the public appearance. Charlotte spent the remaining time before departure coaching her mother through their planned presentation, helping her practice simple responses to likely questions, and establishing subtle signals they could use if Isabella began feeling overwhelmed. The literacy campaign launch was held at Westminster Academy, a prestigious school that served as a model for educational innovation. Mrs. Blackwood was waiting when their car arrived, her sharp eyes immediately assessing both Isabella and Charlotte as they emerged. "Your Majesty, Princess Charlotte," Mrs. Blackwood said with formal courtesy. But Charlotte caught the slight narrowing of her eyes as she observed Isabella's somewhat subdued demeanor. "I'm quite intrigued by the joint presentation concept. It's refreshingly modern." Charlotte stepped forward smoothly. "Mrs. Blackwood, we're both very excited about today's program. Mother and I have been discussing how different generations approach reading and learning, and we thought it would be valuable to share those perspectives with the students." As they moved through the school corridors, Charlotte maintained a steady stream of conversation that included Isabella without requiring extensive responses from her. She had studied Mrs. Blackwood's background extensively and knew the Prime Minister's wife appreciated intellectual discourse over small talk. "Mrs. Blackwood, I've read about your work with the Adult Literacy Trust," Charlotte said. "The statistics about literacy rates among different socio-economic groups are fascinating. I'm particularly interested in how digital media is changing reading comprehension patterns among my generation." Blackwood's eyebrows raised slightly. She hadn't expected such a sophisticated comment from a 12-year-old. "That's a very perceptive observation, Princess. What specific changes have you noticed?" Charlotte launched into a well-researched discussion about reading habits, giving Isabella time to settle into the environment while demonstrating to Mrs. Blackwood that this event would be more substantive than a typical royal photo opportunity. The main presentation took place in the school's library, with an audience of students, teachers, education officials, and selected media representatives. Charlotte had arranged for Isabella to sit at a table with several students, creating a more intimate setting than a formal podium presentation. "Good morning, everyone," Charlotte began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "Mother and I are here today because we believe literacy is the foundation of opportunity, creativity, and social connection." She gestured to Isabella, who managed a warm smile for the students around her. "My mother has been supporting literacy programs for over 15 years, and she's taught me that reading isn't just about acquiring information, it's about developing empathy and understanding different perspectives." Isabella, following Charlotte's lead, began speaking more naturally than she had in weeks. "When I was Charlotte's age, I thought reading was just homework. But my mother, Charlotte's grandmother, showed me that books could be doorways to entirely different worlds." Charlotte watched her mother carefully, noting that interacting with the students was actually helping Isabella relax. Children didn't carry the same threatening judgment that adult audiences did, and Isabella had always been more comfortable in educational settings than formal state events. "Princess Charlotte," one student asked, "what's your favorite book right now?" I'm reading The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, Charlotte replied. It's helping me understand how someone my age dealt with extraordinary circumstances by finding strength in writing and hope. The answer was both authentic and strategically chosen. Charlotte had indeed been reading Anne Frank's diary, finding parallels between Anne's situation and her own unexpected responsibilities, but mentioning it also demonstrated intellectual seriousness while connecting to themes of resilience that were personally relevant. Mrs. Blackwood, observing from the side of the room, found herself genuinely impressed. Charlotte was conducting herself with remarkable poise and substance, while Isabella appeared more engaged and natural than she had seemed in recent public appearances. The question-and-answer session continued smoothly until a student asked, "Queen Isabella, what do you think is the most important thing for young people to learn about leadership?" It was exactly the kind of question that could have triggered Isabella's anxiety. Too personal, too focused on her role as an authority figure. Charlotte saw her mother's brief moment of panic and smoothly intervened. "That's such an important question," Charlotte said, "and it reminds me of something Mother and I were discussing yesterday about different leadership styles." She turned to Isabella with an encouraging look. "Mama, you were telling me about how leadership isn't about having all the answers, but about knowing when to ask for help and how to bring out the best in other people." Isabella seized the lifeline Charlotte had offered. "Yes, exactly. I've learned that the strongest leaders are those who can admit when they're struggling and who surround themselves with people they trust. Leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being genuine and working hard to serve others, even when it's difficult." Charlotte felt a surge of pride watching her mother speak with such honesty and wisdom. Isabella's struggles with mental health hadn't made her weak. They had made her more compassionate and authentic. The event concluded with students reading selected passages aloud, allowing both Isabella and Charlotte to listen and respond naturally, without the pressure of formal speeches. Blackwood approached them as the program ended. "Your Majesty, Princess Charlotte, that was truly exceptional," she said, and Charlotte could tell she meant it. The students were genuinely engaged, and your perspectives on literacy and leadership were both inspiring and practical. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Blackwood pulled Charlotte aside briefly. "Princess, I hope you don't mind my saying so, but you have remarkable presence for someone your age. Have you given thought to what causes you'd like to champion as you get older?" "I'm very interested in mental health awareness and education," Charlotte replied without hesitation. "I think there's still too much stigma around emotional wellness, especially for young people and families dealing with stress." Mrs. Blackwood nodded approvingly. "That's an area where the royal family could make a significant impact. I look forward to seeing how your advocacy develops." On the drive back to the palace, Isabella leaned against Charlotte's shoulder, exhausted but visibly more at peace than she had been in weeks. "Charlotte, thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done that without you." "Yes, you could have, Mama. You just needed someone to remind you how strong you really are." But their moment of relief was interrupted by Lord Hamilton's voice over the car's communication system. "Your Majesty, Princess Charlotte, I'm afraid we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Mr. Morrison has requested a private meeting regarding his quarterly security report. He's indicated that there are unresolved matters that need clarification." Charlotte felt her stomach clench. Morrison's report could expose everything they had worked so hard to protect. As the car approached the palace gates, she realized that their most dangerous challenge was still ahead. "Mama," Charlotte said quietly, "I need you to trust me one more time. Mr. Morrison is going to ask questions about what happened in your study. But I have a plan to handle this too." Isabella looked at her daughter, this remarkable young person who had somehow become the protector instead of the protected, and nodded. "I trust you completely, Charlotte, whatever you think is best." Charlotte squeezed her mother's hand, drawing strength from the confidence Isabella had placed in her. The literacy campaign had been a success, but now came the real test of whether a 12-year-old princess could outmaneuver the palace's security chief and keep her family's secrets safe. As their car pulled through the palace gates, Charlotte began formulating her approach to James Morrison. She had learned over the past weeks that the truth, carefully presented, was often more powerful than deception. The question was whether she could find a version of the truth that would satisfy Morrison's professional obligations while protecting her mother's privacy and dignity. The afternoon sun was setting over Rosewood Palace, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Charlotte realized that in just a few short weeks, she had transformed from a protected child into her family's protector. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but as she looked at her mother's peaceful expression, Charlotte knew that some burdens were worth carrying. Tomorrow would bring Morrison's questions and whatever consequences followed. But tonight, Isabella was safe, their public duties were fulfilled, and their family's reputation remained intact. For a 12-year-old managing an impossible situation, that felt like victory enough.